All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, for taking time out of your day to be with us. Appreciate it. This is always a hot topic. I am going to let everyone get hopped on. Thank you all for joining us today. So excited to have you here. I will go ahead and get started since it's right at 12 o'clock. My name is Tiffany Feingold. I am the co-founder and CEO of Guiding Bright Minds. I hope all of you on the call are familiar with Guiding Bright Minds. Obviously, you saw the advertisement for this webinar, but let me just share a little bit about us. So I'm a parent myself of a neurodivergent child, spouse to a neurodivergent husband, and on my own discovery of my neurodivergence as well. And because of the experience, I launched Guiding Bright Minds, going now on 6 years. And what I wanted to do was create a community that supports each other. And the community is comprised of professionals, businesses, educators, schools, parents, all of us coming together to work to say, you know what, our kids need to be recognized for their amazing strengths, and for their incredible gifts that they bring to this world. And I am in the middle of my journey, and I know there's new discoveries every day. And so one of the things that we do at Guiding Bright Minds is make sure to engage with parents in offering these free services. The first aspect is our directory of providers. I know it's overwhelming to go to Google to search for people, to search for services. So when you come to the Guiding Bright Minds website, you can find providers that I've personally met with, talk to them to find out how are they helping our children, how are they helping us, what does that look like. There is hundreds and hundreds of articles. Not only does Guiding Bright Minds put out articles to help parents on their journey, but also our amazing providers all have the opportunity to share their experiences, their expertise, to help guide us on our next steps. So before we get started, I do also want to share, we have some incredible events coming up. On June 13th, we're hosting our fourth annual Neurodiversity Resource Fair. It's going to be at Denver Academy. I hope you come out. It is truly an all-inclusive, sensory-friendly event. We will have areas, even though it's a fair, so I know there's a lot going on and it can be overwhelming, but we're going to have dedicated areas where parents can go to, but also you know that you're in an environment where it is truly embracing for all of the kids and all of the family members. We'll have things for young kids, things for older kids, all ways of engaging you and your family. So definitely check that out. Our next free parent webinar is April 15th, and that's going to be financial planning. As we think about our kids getting older and whether they're going to live independently or not, what does that look like? What are the supports going to be? So we're going to be talking about that financial planning for our kids as they get older and as we get older ourselves. And then the other event I want to share is Birthday Buddies. I'm so excited. We launched this a few years ago and we're relaunching it in partnership with the Autism Society of Colorado. And so we're here to support your kiddos, specifically in the age range of 4 to 9. We're also partnering with Monkey Business of Parker and Westminster, where we're going to celebrate those kids' birthdays who might not have the opportunity to do so. And the next event is going to be celebrating April, May, and June birthdays. It is all on our website. We list all of the events, all of the information and details. So hopefully you can check that out. Well, I'm super excited to introduce to you Elizabeth Green and her amazing work over the years to support families, to support kiddos. And as we know, so many really need to have the understanding as us as parents when it comes to executive functioning. What does that mean? And you also had a great buzzword, Elizabeth, with burnout, which is real. And this is where my passion with you parents and letting you know you're not alone, because oftentimes we think we are. So Elizabeth is the occupational therapist and owner of Lean Consulting. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for taking your time, and I will turn it over to you to go ahead and get started and introduce yourself about your
Sure.
experience and
Thank
expertise.
you. Thank you. And great seeing everybody. I'm really excited to do this talk. So, my name is Liz Green. I've been an occupational therapist for 24 years now. I actually got started in pediatrics and was, actually at Children's Hospital, Colorado for 12 years and moved from Colorado 3.5 years ago to Virginia, where I live now with my family. But I still feel like Colorado is such a huge part of me, who I am as a person and as a therapist. And in fact, the brunt of my caseload, because I see neurodivergent clients, the brunt of my caseload is in Colorado. So sometimes I get like geographically confused as to where I'm actually sitting right now. So I started Link Consulting about 5 years ago because I felt like, and we know this, there's just this huge issue with the services cliff after kids graduate. No more IEPs or 504s. Maybe they're in college, maybe they're going into work, but there's just a complete lack of supports. And so I wanted to move into that space more. And I really love the cognitive side of occupational therapy. I'm going to talk a little bit about OT as well, because I think most people, if they've heard of OT, they've heard of it more with pediatrics or even with like geriatrics or post injury. And so then it can be very confusing as to what we actually do. So I'm going to talk a little bit about OT, but then also with my company, we have a lot of other activities that we're involved in. And so I'll talk a little bit about that as well. So I'm going to screen share.
And while you're pulling that up, I do want to let people know that we will allow time for question and answers. You
Mhm.
can use the Q&A section or the chat section as well. And a copy or a recording of this presentation and a copy of the presentation will be sent out.
Thank you. And yeah, I'll be, it's a lot of stuff that we're going to be talking about, but I'll pause for questions at different points. I think it's great that this is going to be recorded and also sent out later. So I don't want you to have to feel like you have to furiously take notes or try to understand something and then miss out on kind of the breadth of what I'm covering. So, note, maybe keep this at a service level for yourself, and then you can always go back and review more later if you'd like. So, um, this session is entitled OT Informed Strategies to Reduce Overwhelm. Sorry, my camera's in high school and beyond. Understanding executive function, sensory processing, and burnout. So we're going to be talking for a little bit about what my company is, Link Consulting, and then we're going to dig right into breaking down that term overwhelm. What does that mean? How is that relevant? And then we're going to dig into executive function, sensory processing, masking, and more, and talk a lot about what OT strategies could be considered if any of these areas are of challenge to a person. And then I'm going to talk about a platform that I created to you at the very end of this, so you can see some of the other stuff we're working on. So, Link Consulting, my company, we provide occupational therapy. I see clients, still how I keep the lights on. And I have contractors who see clients in Colorado, and we take Medicaid. We're also vendors of DVR. And really, our focus is, if you think about OT, if you've ever heard of it, OT is really about helping people get stuff done in life that's important to them, if I'm going to be simple about it. And so with kids, that might be, okay, how are we going to get through the school day so you can learn, but also play, maybe make friends. Maybe if you've had an injury as an older adult, how can you get back to the things in life that matter to you? The same thing applies when we're talking about OT with the specific I would say, teen to adult kind of neurodivergent client profile. That's really what I'm describing here in the bread and butter of Link. So we're looking at what are the things that are important to this person and how can we help them achieve those goals. And so that could be getting through college, work, accessing the community, making friends, transportation, finances, the getting stuff done, which is executive function. We're going to talk about that. So OT is really good. We're trained in something called task analysis, which is really where if a person comes to me and says, I'm having a problem with doing X, whatever that may be, Our training is one where we really dig in and problem solve, like, why is that a problem? What are the patterns, the ways that you live, the roles that you take, the stressors that you're encountering? How can we help you achieve that goal that you want while keeping in mind this whole person that you are? And so we're really different than, say, a coach or other providers who may not have the therapy, the OT lens background, and that we are extremely holistic. So we're constantly bringing in, we're very complementary to mental health services, but we're really about the activities that the person wants to do. So it's action oriented, client driven, neurodiversity affirming. And we're looking at these areas: executive function, sensory processing, lifestyle, and so on. And I think one cool thing about Link is because we've done a lot of training in the employer space on neurodiversity inclusive design, we can bring that into our conversations with clients of, like, thinking about what are workplaces like, how can we advocate for what we need at work, accommodations with or without disclosure. So work is a big part of OT with Link. And then NeuroHub Learning, which I'll talk more about. I basically created this digital platform over the past year because of this access problem that we're seeing. And I wanted to create an educational tool for people. So basically what I cover within the platform and what I have content creators placing within the platform is content related to understanding your brain, preventing burnout, and getting hired. Those are kind of the three main areas. And then what people find is micro learning, so lessons they can watch, but also access to live experts, as well as boot camps, which are this kind of higher support option within NeuroHub. And it's really designed to be, I mean, this is under $30 a month for a subscription to this. So I'm seeking to kind of move through that and resolve some of the access problems that so many individuals have, to kind of reduce the size of that services cliff. So I'm now going to dig in and talk about this term overwhelm, because when clients come to me and say, I mean, generally there is always stress. When I have clients reach out to me for occupational therapy of, like, there's so many things I have going on. I don't know where to start. Maybe I just got a diagnosis. I don't know where to start. These things are hard. Maybe I can't pay rent. Maybe there's so many things. And what we do as OTs is then we think about, okay, let's break this down. So what is causing overwhelm for you? Is it executive functions, like cognition, like your profile, the way you think and process, time management, maybe planning or attention? Is it life factors? Maybe it's things that, such as, if a person's basically living paycheck to paycheck, that can cause a lot of overwhelm, right? So are there life factors going in? Are there internal factors such as mental and physical health, trauma, sensory processing, masking? I just was talking on the platform I mentioned, NeuroHub, with a neurologist about autoimmune disorders and dysautonomia, which fits in that internal factor category. If a person's not feeling good because they have chronic inflammation, well, that's a big deal. And that causes overwhelm. External factors, the people around us, whether it be people close to us or even people, a cashier at a store, all of that affects us. Social media, global events, and so on. And so I dig into that right off the bat with clients. And then also I want to just not even gloss over the depth of being neurodivergent. So aside from the overwhelm that I described in this very concrete terms, I love this iceberg analogy, which can be applied to any neurodivergent condition. But this idea of, what people see on the top, there's so much more under the surface that people often have to mask or cover up in order to fit in. And so that adds to overwhelm, right? So you can see some of the examples here of how that could play out. But as we're talking about executive function, which is kind of that first area of overwhelm, I kind of think of it in terms of 5 core capabilities. And the thing with executive function is generally when a person gets, say, psychological testing, or even as an OT, when we do our evaluations, we will assess executive function a lot of times in the form of an adult filling out a self-report. There's various different executive function standardized testings, assessments that we can use. I'm not going to go into every single, it fits into a huge number of categories. But these are the 5 core categories. and that I'm going to review just to keep it simple. So the first one is self-control, which basically allows us to set priorities and resist impulses. So for example, a person saying, okay, I'm not going to get sucked into my phone. I'm going to do my homework right now. That takes a lot of self-control. Flexibility is another huge one. So being able to adapt to changing situations, like, I'm just going to, okay, my study group couldn't meet. That's fine. I'm just going to go study by myself. So being able to shift. We can see a lot of times, especially individuals who may be autistic, flexibility can be harder, right? But it can be harder or easier for any number of people. It's not a one size, you've met one person who's neurodivergent, you met one person who's neurodivergent. And then awareness. So noticing people and situations around us and how we all fit into that picture. So I'm going to walk into, say, a library and notice, like, I need to keep my voice down. There's a certain kind of social norms that I have to follow. It could also be awareness of even monitoring yourself as you're doing different activities and being able to adjust as needed. Focus, so concentrating on what's important at any given time. So this is a big one for many of us. I can focus on what I need to do right now, even though I really want to watch TV or get sucked into something else. And then planning is the final core capability. So being able to make concrete plans, carry them out, and set and meet goals. And planning is a huge beast of a thing in and of itself. So it's not just, what I just listed there. You've got to come up with a plan. You got to problem solve it. You got to figure out, okay, where do I start and execute it? So there's steps, and then course correct if needed. So there's all these different components to planning, just the same as there's multiple components to all the other core capabilities. So in the case of, say, a person who's applying for jobs, there's so many steps to that. It's not just, even if I'm thinking about the job application, you got to create the resume. You probably have to track what jobs you've applied to or not. Who are you talking to? You're not, there's so much planning that goes into that, as well as these other core capabilities. And the main thing here is, what is important to note is, in application for neurodivergent folks, executive function is not a measure of intelligence. So if any of these areas are hard, it doesn't mean that the person isn't smart or capable or can't do great things. And everybody has a spiky EF profile, executive function profile, meaning there's some things that we're really good at and some things we're not. I know for me, if you were to ask my husband, he would say my impulse control is not the best, which sometimes has bit me in the butt as a business owner. So then I have to come up with compensatory strategies. Like, I know this thing is hard, so I've got to figure out this workaround. When tasks are interesting, we often find that executive function is easier. Environment matters. So the less clarity of tasks, the more sensory overload, the fewer accommodations the person might have, the harder executive function is. Mental health also matters. This is not rocket science, right? So if you're dealing with increased stress or not feeling happy, it makes executive function harder. And I should also say on here, I didn't write it, but sleep is a huge contributor. Diet, exercise, all of that. So really, it's not about changing your cognitive processing. It's about finding workarounds. That's kind of what I do with people. But also, I try to use a bottom-up approach, meaning if there's baseline areas in life that are not resolved, such as poor sleep, poor nutrition, maybe significant financial insecurity, person doesn't feel safe in their own house. I often find as an OT that I am first sort of doing a kind of a case management role of trying to get them these resources to improve that. Because if you are in this stress state where your foundational needs are not met, then executive function is not going to change. So a lot of times this could involve bringing outside providers in. And as OTs, we are big proponents of being holistic and multidisciplinary in our intervention approach. So some facts versus myths here, and you can put in the chat or just think about them yourself of what may be a fact versus myth. I'm going to read off each one. And I see there are questions. I'm going to pause within the next few slides for the questions. So executive function is mostly about organization. Think to yourself, is that a fact or a myth? And you can put it in the chat if you want. So that is definitely a myth. Like I said, the organization fits under all of those kind of core capability areas, but it is not just about that. And I also see it as something where if a person from a regulation perspective, from a calming stress perspective, if that part's not managed, then organization doesn't get better. The more stressed you are, the harder organization is. Executive function therapy or coaching fixes the brain. That is a myth. I also just being neurodiversity affirming as a by requirement for my team, like I don't see therapeutic intervention as being something that's supposed to fix somebody. There's nothing wrong with the person. It really is about finding workarounds. Executive function is not a standalone diagnosis, usually associates with an underlying condition. So that is a fact, definitely correlates with other conditions. Generally, if you have the right tools for organization, executive function issues can be resolved. I would say that's a myth. That's kind of a flippant, like that's probably what some of the apps out there might say of like, just use our app, and then all of a sudden everything will get easier. I think that's a piece of it, but there's also a lot of other things in life that we have to look at. General health and wellness and mental health do not influence executive function. And that is a myth. If you find strategies that help your executive function, you should keep using them long term. Fact, yes. But sometimes some strategies work sometimes and sometimes they don't, right? So it's always important to keep reevaluating what's working and what's not. Growth in your executive function skills is never linear. There are starts and stops, improvements and regressions. The most important thing is knowing when help is needed and getting the right support. And that is a fact. So the main thing here is it's really important in this case. The whole point of me talking about this is so that you can stop blaming yourself for bad habits or laziness. This is not that. And you can have more success figuring out how to frame your needs, spot warning signs, build routines, and don't waste money on the wrong tool that doesn't necessarily work. So I'll pause for questions there, if there are any.
And just a reminder again, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat or the QA section. I don't see any questions at this time.
Great. So, and I'm going to be bringing this all together. It's more just informational right now. So another big area that we look at is called sensory processing. And I think there's a lot more focus on sensory integration and sensory processing in pediatrics than adults. I also think that the approach to how we help people who may have sensory processing differences is significantly different for adults than it is with kids. So with kids, oftentimes, if there's a sensory processing difference, maybe they'll go to an outpatient setting. There's a gym, there's focus on, helping them develop skills or increase tolerance to different types of sensory input coming at them. With adults, it's much more of a workaround strategy of focus than a treatment focus, right? And so there's kind of two sides to sensory processing. The one side is we look at reactivity to input. So, this is the one that people tend to think about the most when they're thinking about sensory systems. So we all, you can be under or overreactive to different types of inputs, such as touch and sound. You can see some of these examples here. Taste, like picky eating, sensitive to food textures. Movement, this is a big one, especially, for individuals who maybe as a kid, movement has always been kind of hard. Maybe they would get nervous even as a kid going on swings or being sort of out of upright. And then it definitely gets more challenging as an adult, especially as we all tend to be more sedentary in our ways the older we get. And so then movement can actually become more stress inducing as the person ages. And smell, vision, and then interoception is a really huge one that I talk about a lot with clients, which really relates to knowing what's going on internally. So whether that be your emotions. So a lot of my clients will say, I don't know what I feel sometimes. Like you ask me how I'm feeling, I don't know how I feel. And so what we then end up doing a lot is figuring out compensatory strategies to help them, even if it's developing this sense of awareness of like what's going on physiologically. Is your chest tight? Right? How's your breathing? If you think about your reaction to other people or even being around people, are you able to focus and do work and things like that right now, or are you not? So you can start to identify possibly how emotions might be for you, by correlating them with really concrete um, things that you can see or feel. And for example, one of the apps that I love that helps, that I think is great for interoception, was created by a bunch of Yale scientists and healthcare providers. It's called How We Feel. And it's great in that, so from the emotion check-in side, it asks you to check how you're feeling. And it has this cool wheel where you can check your emotions. Sometimes that can be hard, but then it also asks about sensation. So even if you just click one of the emotions, I don't know, I'm unpleasant somewhere, whatever, then you click sensation. Is it pleasant, not, whatever. And then it sort of guides you through, okay, so based on how you're feeling, if it's kind of unpleasant, here's some tools that you could try. Here's some things. I love that, right? So in Tears, I just went off on a tangent into like intervention. Sorry. Uh, interoception is emotion, can be related to emotion recognition, but also physiologic. So the need, knowing if you need to go to the bathroom, or if you're tired, or if you need to eat, that can be another thing that's can be very challenging for a person. And then on the other side of sensory processing is the motor side. Things like balance, coordination, strength, fine motor skills, and praxis. We tend to see more of a focus with this in pediatrics than with adults. I'm not out there trying to get adults to work on their balance. What I'm after is saying, okay, whether you're reactive or maybe, yes, you feel like you could use some help with exercising and building core strength, it really moves in the space of like, what are compensatory strategies that can help you so that you can function in the best way that works for you? And what are baby steps towards where you want to be? So for example, if a person, say if we are talking about motor stuff, and say they're on the computer all day and they have back pain, and they know that their core strength has always been hard, then it may be something where I might say, hey, physical therapy could be helpful for you. Or let's think about some really baby step types of movement activities that could be helpful. The number of times I've done like a simple like yoga stretch with somebody on a Zoom call just to help them feel movement is, yes, I've done it a lot. But what impacts all of this is emotional control of behavior and thoughts.
Hey, Elizabeth, we did have somebody inquire, they have an 11-year-old daughter, but
Mm-hmm.
um, will this apply? And she's indicated a lot applies to her, but is this aimed more towards older children?
Yes. So this talk is really around OT strategies when we're at high school and beyond. Now I bring in some points about pediatrics in this talk, but the session is definitely designed for the older population in mind. So I'm sorry if that is not what you're looking for. It's just, I also think like speaking with a pediatric OT about some of this stuff, while there may be similarities, there's definitely huge differences. And I also feel like in general, there's just not enough for adults. And so that's honestly why the whole origin of all of this for me and Link and so on. So self-regulation, I talk about, this is how people are able to regulate their emotions, emotional control, things like that. It's very much a part of executive function, and it's also a part of sensory processing. It's a part of everything. So people, you have behavioral control. So a person, you feel the rise of irritation, but being able to control that impulse to maybe hit somebody or something else. Controlling your thoughts, like that's a form of emotional control. I know for myself, when I get stressed, I tend to ruminate. So I'll just like spiral on thoughts. That can be hard, right? And these self-regulation can be conscious or unconscious, and it creates our self-concept and who we are. So all of this to say, like, I'm saying all these things. If any of these things are hard, I hear you. They are for all of us. And I think the main thing out of this is I'm telling you all this information to be educational and informational, but like when you have a good provider, it's not your job to figure out what is challenging or what, like that's where you're working with somebody who can help you and figure out how do we make life easier and where can we start together so that it is really baby steps. And the thing with sensory processing challenges is they almost always co-occur with another condition. So you can see the kind of rainbow of different conditions that often correlate with sensory integration or sensory processing disorder. I have very rarely seen people who only have a sensory processing difference who don't also have another co-occurring diagnosis. Doesn't mean it can't happen, but it's also not surprising to me because if as a kid, say, and it's chicken or the egg, like did they start with the sensory processing issue or the other co-occurring disorder, and then that led to the sensory processing? We don't know. But I will say, if we're just talking about, say, a kid who, maybe when they're young, like bright lights bothered them and clothing, and maybe they're nervous about leaving mom. And so then it does affect their tolerance for different types of sensory input, whether it be movement or sound or people in their space or whatever. And then if they're pushed, which often they can be, that makes people anxious. And so then you see this, as I've tended to see moving from pediatrics to adults, the older the child gets who may have a sensory processing condition, the more likely there is intertwinement with something mental health related. And also, we're talking about autism, ADHD, strong correlation with sensory processing differences. One other term, I'm going to talk about a few more terms related to sensory processing, and one is called habituation, which is a big one, I think, to note when we're talking about neurodivergent populations. So it's this idea of becoming less sensitive to a stimulus after repeated exposure. So, for example, if I live near train tracks, the first time the train goes by, when I move into my new house, I'm going to notice the train and be like, geez, that's loud. The second, third, fourth, you start adjusting. So eventually where people are like, oh, I didn't even hear that. That's called habituation. And what we tend to see with many neurodivergent folks is that there can be challenges with tolerating the input, but also recovering from that sensory input after it passes. I like this graphic created by a neurodivergent person that talks about, the neurotypical brain. When a dog barks the first time, maybe it alerts a little bit, but then after a while, it just is like, okay, whatever, I'm not hearing that. And then he says his brain, every bark is new, right? And that's a very stressful way to have to live. I'm going to pause for a second. Any questions related to that?
I don't see any
Okay.
questions. Oh, wait a minute. There is. Any tips on finding good teen providers or transitioning from traditional pediatric OT to move of what you're talking about?
I would say reach out to me because that's what we do. And I do have some providers in Denver, and I see some teens in Colorado via telehealth. But if they want in person, I'll put my email in the chat. If I can help you with that. And there's a few other places like Gather and Grow in Lafayette. I don't know of too many though. It can be hard to find OT for adult populations.
Yeah, and anything specific on that transition? Like, how do you go from what does that look like in coordinating
So are you saying, when you say in coordinating, what?
between the pediatric OT to kind of like the adult? What is that transitioning from
Oh,
one?
I mean,
Yeah.
so a lot of times by the time I feel like they're pediatric OT, kids tend to have, when they're maybe under 5 on up to maybe 12, 13. And then after that, you don't see as many kids coming into these pediatric clinics. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen. And it's not to say that I don't believe that they age out. I think that OT training can look very different. So, like when I moved from pediatrics into adults, I had to get a lot more training and understanding of mental health and executive function, employment, even talking with, student disability services departments at colleges. There was a lot that I didn't know. I had never heard of vocational rehabilitation. I think it's hard for pediatric OTs to know all of that, because there's just such a big difference in what they have to help the client with in comparison to adult. And it is really hard to have that transition be seamless. I think what I love about Denver is that it seems like it's not just the OTs that are becoming more educated. It's also providers, primary care physicians, psychologists in general. And so I tend to get most of my referrals from primary care physicians and psychologists who are writing it on these reevaluations or new evaluations that teens and adults are getting. So I'm not getting referrals from pediatric OTs because I think there's honestly a gap in services. Oftentimes, unless the person has really significant needs, like in high school, I tend to not see OTs referring to us when they reach adulthood because the services fall off. So hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you.
Is there another one in there? Okay, I just saw a couple others. I'm not reading the chat. So
there's one that just says, was echo already been addressed?
Okay. So the big thing here is we talked about all these like kind of heavy topics and haven't even, like I said, it's just very content heavy. But the other ones that I haven't mentioned, I'm not going to spend too long on them, but communication differences can be significant, right? We've got executive function, sensory differences, mental health, all of these things. When a person's having to deal with those differences, when we're thinking about neurotypical, right? If a society is sort of designed for neurotypical in mind, which is the unfortunate reality, then often a neurodivergent person is spending much of their time trying to adjust or blend in. And that takes a toll. And that is called masking. And that's what we see happening. And so when I am seeing my teens and adults, I am not diving into executive function or communication or sensory. What I am talking with them first about is masking, self-regulation, so stress management. Self-awareness is probably the number one thing. Who am I and what do I need? And how can I advocate for it? Those are the hard ones because oftentimes people, when it comes to coping strategies, you're sort of told like you just have to put up with this stuff and deal, whatever it is. And by the time people are teens and adults, there's a lot of trauma they've dealt with. And so they're just barely hanging on by a thread. And so we're focusing a lot on let's slow it down and work on what can we do to make your life easier, basically. And so I'm just going to talk briefly about this cycle of burnout, which again, I don't feel that I should be the only one leading on this type of a conversation. I think mental health has to be a part of the conversation. We're talking about burnout or loss of skills. But if you think about a young person, and this does fit across the life cycle, oftentimes, especially when you're neurodivergent, maybe there's certain preferred interests or certain ways of wanting to do things to be. My son has ADHD, for example. So ton of energy, comes into a room and, glass shatters type thing. We love him, but it's a lot, right? So he does his thing, but also he gets in trouble a lot more than his brother, unfortunately. And so there's judgment. And so then he's kind of gets this idea of like, well, if I act this way, this negative will happen. So the person's kind of confused. And then they self-judge. And I see this already with my son. And then they start watching and they start mimicking because they want to survive and they want to get by. And then they get reinforced for mimicking or masking. And then they sustain it and sustain it. And then eventually you can start to see burnout symptoms, which really relates to fatigue, loss of skills, strong correlation with mental health. Now, oftentimes when I'm seeing people, they're coming in with burnout symptoms. And so they've got this lifetime of trauma coming at them. So I'm not going to just dive in with like, let's work on productivity. Like that does not work. It's really around how do we bring joy back into this person's life? So if I'm thinking about even one of my clients right now, she graduated um, from a really good university and lives, because I have clients in Northern Virginia, and had grown up in a culture where like neurodivergence wasn't accepted. It wasn't even real. So she's masked hard to get through college. And then she started applying for jobs and she wasn't getting any, and she shut down completely. I think she had to stay on an inpatient, like an intensive outpatient program and a partial hospitalization program for a while. And as I'm seeing her now from the referral from her mental health provider, we are just working on finding activities that bring her joy. There is no pressure on productivity. So for her, that's crafts. Maybe that's walking into her backyard. I mean, these are small things where we're working on the idea of like what are activities that help you feel a little better, and where can we go? How can we help you build? Because you need to see like those actionable day-to-day little simple things. I want her to see that she can do them, and it makes her feel better. She's proud of herself. Like, I just cooked oatmeal this week. That's awesome, right? It's baby steps. There's a really great video that I don't have time to show, but you'll get that. It's I always feel like, I could spout all day about this stuff. I am not the expert. Neurodivergent individuals who have lived experience with this are the expert. And so I'm constantly pulling in with the platform I created, and any of the talks I do, I always want neurodivergent voices to be a part of it. This person, she was a college student and she did a TEDx talk on autistic masking. It's a really powerful presentation that she gave. So you can view that later if you like. Whoop, it should not be playing. Sorry. All right. Any other questions?
No, but somebody did, from a parent point of view, kind of going back to that transition where
Mm-hmm.
to call agencies to ask to speak to the treatment supervisor, tell them the age, what the issues you're hoping to be addressed, and ask the supervisor who's the best match. I mean, I know I went through that with my son as the pediatric OT. I'm like, this is not serving his needs right now. What's the next level and next step? So appreciate that feedback as well.
That's great. And honestly, if you're not sure, just email me. Like, I will help you, even if it's not me that sees you or your child. Like, I can help you with that. I think primary care physicians, because they oversee our care, like with Medicaid, our referrals have to come from an MD now, but we get a lot of mental health providers sending people to us, and then we say, go to your primary care physician and get a referral. But if you are feeling like you're missing a service, you can certainly reach out to me. I do think primary care physicians are supposed to be able to handle that stuff. And so you should definitely talk to them. And hopefully there's a mental health provider involved, because they could also be a helpful person in navigating this.
Okay. And then somebody asked if you work with adults with IDD/ASD.
Yeah. With telehealth, it can be a little more complicated, but sometimes we will then have a parent on the call as well. So they're helping with translating things. But also, yes, our contractors, I have a contractor that's seeing somebody in their house right now and working on independence. So it depends on location and stuff. I don't have contractors all over Denver, but yes, please reach out. We can talk through that. So I'm gonna, for the sake of time, I'm gonna move through some of this stuff. Because it's too much information. um, so this was a little bit of information about a sensory diet. I'll give you an example here. So I talked in previous slides that I just jumped through. When I see people that come to me, they're often very, very stressed and kind of running on empty. And so one of the things we talk about are like, all right, what are different little activities we can insert throughout your day, starting really small to help you feel more regulated. So you can see in this column, this kind of far right column, some of the things that might be inserted. And it doesn't mean that it's a slam dunk. There's often always some other resources we're working on, but the real key with sensory diet stuff or sensory strategies is dosing strategies throughout the day, little kind of, what do we call them? Sensory snacks, I've heard the term. Different things that a person can do throughout the day preventatively to help them regulate. And I see this all the time. I remember with kids, I saw it, so many kids holding it together all day in school and then falling apart at home. And I always push, and I push it for kids and I push it for adults, that having little breaks throughout the day is vital. And here's the thing too, say you have a kid in school and maybe they won't remember to take the break. Well, then how do we actually build, what are strategies that we can use to help them to remember it? So if they have a 504, for example, and the teacher's like, yeah, they could take a break and go walk around or whatever, but I can't remind them. Fair, they shouldn't have to. So I've had kids get smart watches, even like kid related versions where maybe there's like a vibration alert that goes off or some other alert system to help them see that they need to take the break. So I've spent multiple sessions at a time with families trying to figure out how do we help this kid develop that awareness of the need to take a break, and do we need to use external cues? It should not all be on the parent to be like, go take a break. And if it is, and you're seeing an OT, go back to them and say, how do we work on developing my child's skills in knowing when to take a break? And should we use some sort of alert system? And how could we incorporate that in? Because it shouldn't all be on the adult to do that, because it's not going to work long term, because the adults will forget. It shouldn't always have to be on the parent. Talk about spoons quite a bit, which are like energy units with the adults I work with, energy conservation, noticing how much you have to give. And we talk a lot about compensatory strategies. Here's a few examples of like, I tell clients a lot, how can we body double? How can we get stuff done together? Like for my college students, if you're finding that you're not getting your work done at home in your home environment, would it help to text a friend and ask them to meet you? Because then if you don't show up, you're going to feel bad. So that's just one example. There's a lot of different other strategies that we build in. Because we want the person overall, we want you to feel better, have more spoons or energy so that daily activities and interactions become more manageable. That's the goal and more motivating. All right. Any other questions?
There was a question that talks about, how to increase independence skills while decreasing burnout. Our homeschooled teen neurodivergent teen has opted out of all chores due to burnout.
Oh, that's hard. That's such a loaded one too, because this is where I would say email me. It's not an easy one to answer in like 20 seconds. Burnout, I never want to dispute if somebody says I'm burnout, okay, they have that right to say it. I think one of the things that I try to dig into when I work with clients is separating true burnout, which is like loss of skills, like cannot physically like move, from motivation, from things like pathological demand avoidance, which is a real thing. And I actually have found I spend a lot of time talking about pathological demand avoidance with my teen and adult clients. It's not something you just talk with a parent about. Having them, if you've not heard of it, look it up, but it's this idea of when a demand is placed, this feeling of needing to resist. And it's not like somebody's being bad or lazy. They actually feel the resistance. And it relates to not wanting the loss of control and the fear of losing control. And I'll give you one example. So I was just meeting with one of my adult clients yesterday, and he's like, I really want to improve. Like, I need to be better about getting administrative stuff done, showing up for doctor's appointments, like all the other non-school stuff. And I'm like, well, what systems have you tried in the past? And he's like, well, I know that writing stuff down helps, but the thought of a planner makes me sick. And when we talked about it more, and he was like, well, when I was in school, we were put in a special ed classroom and they forced us to use these planner systems. And I just felt like I was a bad kid and I wasn't good enough. And so he now has this trauma response to something being enforced on him based on something that happened as a kid, this planner thing. And so then we work together to figure out, okay, well, and this is where I use something called motivational interviewing, where it's really questioning the person, kind of putting them in the driver's seat of like, you are seeing that this thing is the problem and you want it to increase, you want it to improve, but you don't know how. And basically questioning them around how we can find the answer together. And so what he landed on was, well, actually, I really love art. And I love the idea of maybe turning my sketchbook into a planner. And I'm going to decorate it how I want it. And I'll write my to-dos on there. And then I'll check them every morning when I look at my phone. We'll see how it plays out. But that is the way of like inserting a level of control. Now, I'm not going to say that that's going to work with chores. Chores are usually not very non-preferred. So I would say reach out to me because that's the kind of thing we talk about in OT. All right. So the last thing I'm going to say, just as I was talking about the services cliff, we see this siloing of systems. It's a really big problem. And then we see access problems. And so that's why I created this platform called NeuroHub. It's really to bridge that gap. And like I said, there's micro learning and expert live chats. There's kind of three main areas. If you are interested in it, I can send information out so you don't have to worry about QR codes right now. I'm running a job searching boot camp starting March 30th as an example where people, this camp will be, it's $80 for 8 weeks and it's facilitated by myself, but I also bring in experts like I have an HR person, a recruiter in, a job coach in. And so it's a way to work in a group environment on some of this really hard stuff. So that's kind of my quick and dirty on NeuroHub. I would love for you to complete the survey. I will definitely send this stuff out later. Oh, and we still have a couple minutes for questions. Perfect. I moved really fast at the end.
Now that was great. Thank you so much. So much information and executive function, as we know, yes, is definitely needed for our kiddos. I don't see any other questions. Anyone else in the chat?
I would love if they do have a second, it would be interesting to me to know who you are, not too much detail in the chat of like maybe if you're a parent and if you are, what's the age of your kid? If you have any, because that would be helpful, or if you're a provider or whatever else. And because I do have a lot of pediatric experience, like I can add a little bit more if needed. So if you do want to provide any information, I am interested to know if like the majority of parents on here have, kids under 15 versus older.
So we have a parent of a 15-year-old.
Okay.
And a mental health provider in practice. 17-year-old son, ADHD, Asperger's. 20-year-old learning to live alone without parents. Parent of 18, 15, 10. 8-year-old, 18-year-old. I know that one of the last ladies that asked was from the UK. So we also have people all over the world.
Oh, cool.
I think on the registration there was at least 8 people from the UK on here.
That's great.
13-year-old ADHD parent, so autism, ADHD.
I don't know. If you in the UK, Amanda Kirby is a physician in the UK who is probably one of the most well-regarded neurodiversity experts in the world. I don't know where her practice is, but if you are seeking more local resources there, she's great. And I follow her. Her stuff is applicable to no matter where you are. But yeah, there's a lot of different ages.
Yeah, there's thoughts on TUI ASD teen who are highly resistant to mental health therapy, OTEF coaching, despite high level of need. I just had a parent reach out to me too, where therapy, it was a younger child though, like 10, but just so resistant to therapy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's such a great question. So this is a part where I honestly feel like sometimes, a lot of times, healthcare providers, we have to do a better job. When I have parents call me and they say exactly what you said, I think the really key thing, and this is where I even ask for like a trial session of like, but maybe they won't even do that. What do they want? Right. And it could be, I want my parents to leave me alone and I want to do my own thing, or I want to, whatever it may be. And then it's OT can be a really good bridge to that, because when parents are trying to explain it, it's like, well, okay, if you want to say move out in a couple years, how are we going to get to that point? Like, how are you going to make money to be able to move out? Where are you going to live? Right now, if they're fighting tooth and nail, if they're open to talking to somebody like an OT, what we do is we get really concrete really quickly. And I find that people who are generally resistant to mental health, say therapy, and rightfully so, especially if it's talk therapy and it's a lot of emotion stuff. And that can be very kind of confusing, right? I've had a lot of people have negative experiences with traditional mental health when it's too like talky and they're like, I don't know what we're talking about, right? OT is really, really concrete. And so usually there's something that a person wants, even if it's to be like a professional video game creator, I don't know, a YouTuber. Okay, well, this person can help you get there, because there's a lot of stuff that you have to do to get to that. You have to probably go to college, you might have to, whatever, research it, right? So it's concrete. And we can use that as like the long term goal and then help them back it up and figure out like what are reasonable benchmarks. If you want to hit that goal, let's get clear on it. And now, how are you going to get there? Right. And OT can help with that. So that's the biggest thing I would say. I don't know if that's helpful, but
I think that's very helpful. And you know what? It was just actually a realization for me as a parent because, when you first get the diagnosis, um, depending, regardless of what age your child is at, then you get thrown all these services. And I know for me in the beginning, early on at age 5, I'm like, oh my gosh, in order to be a good parent to support my child, I must provide all of these services. And then I
mm-hmm,
was like a year and a half in, maybe 2 years, I'm like, what are we doing? Like enough is enough. Like let's
mm-hmm,
prioritize, because I think when we're talking about the trauma or maybe the resistance is because um it wasn't laid out, or it was so negative maybe in the beginning because there was so much pounded on from an early age that it is overwhelming for the child to where
yeah,
they're like, how can they be a kid and just enjoy life? And
yeah,
so that was
it's really
just
hard.
yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, I don't want to poo poo providers for putting everything out there, but there isn't really a pacing person. And
Right.
there's also, you know, some services that I think are not the most neurodiversity affirming. I'm not going to get into what exactly I think those are, but like they leave people with a really sour taste in their mouth that any provider will help them ever. They were never heard, they weren't respected, um, they had no control. And so, why would they want to restart with somebody else that's just going to tell them what to do? And so, then it's about building trust. And that's
Yes.
hard. And that's where, and I'm not saying like OT is the magic bullet, but sometimes I've seen OT is sort of the conduit, the bridge towards the person being willing to receive other mental health services. Because when I'm working with clients, I'm talking about like, as I'm building rapport and you want to do X, Y, or Z thing, well, I'm seeing some of these symptoms here, like you're not sleeping, you're stressed about a lot of stuff. Like, I think it would be helpful to talk to somebody. Some of this stuff is not in my scope. And so we start pulling more people in. I've been, the number of people I've done that with, like, for example, I love Aurora Mental Health, love them because they provide wraparound services. So I've had so many clients that start with me, and I'm like, we got to get you a good mental health provider, psychiatry, maybe sleep study, housing person, social work, all there. But they got to start with one person. And then I'm actually helping them make phone calls to these places because that alone is so overwhelming. So,
It is. You don't know what
yeah,
to ask. You don't know what to look
no,
for. I mean, yeah.
yeah,
Um, oh, we're just getting a lot of positive. Like one mom said, this is so eye-opening, 100%. My kid would respond better to concrete OT approach than talk
mm-hmm,
therapy. Lacking affirming support is a big problem, especially when it's with trusted providers in the community. Um, So, yeah, and then somebody's asking specific about your therapies. So Mary, what I'll do is have, because you're asking like, what does therapy look like, weekly visits, how long does it last? I'll connect you guys. So that's more of like a one-on-one. conversation to have. But I think just as a reminder, and again, for those that know me, it's just a constant daily journey that I know we're all on. My son's just 12. So I'm, in the thick of just what I'm going through and uncovering. So thank you all for joining, because one thing that I am passionate is for how do we work together to let parents they're not alone. There are some great conversations like this. Elizabeth, this is so impactful in that conversation. So hopefully it can continue on and we can do a 2.0 version of this, because I know so many people have more questions and dive maybe even granular into that level of
Mhm.
support. So I'll make sure to get that out there. Thank you
Yeah,
all
can
for
I
the
just say one thing? Because I definitely don't want to come across as saying, don't do this sort of talk therapy thing. That's not my call. That's
yeah.
for like an intake, so I don't want you to think that I want you to go in demanding only X, Y, or Z, because I am not a mental health provider. I'm an OT. And so, but it is important to advocate. I need more concrete stuff with my child. This is not, be brought in as a parent. I I required my parents in pediatrics to come into my sessions with me so I could work with them. And you have the right, right? So, anyways, sorry. I could go on for another hour.
Me too. Me too. Thank you so much. This was
Yeah,
amazing. And
thank
I
you.
agree for all the parents too, because I know I want to learn. And that's the biggest advocacy for our children and understanding is understanding the depth of the services and diving more in. There's somebody else who's
Mhm.
interested. Kim, I got your name. I'll just make sure. Elizabeth, did you put your, oh yeah, your email's there
Uh,
and your links there. And
yeah, and
it'll
I'll
be
send it.
in here because I'm sending out a copy of this so everyone will get it. So please reach out to Elizabeth for next steps in your journey. I appreciate everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you again. This was amazing.
Thank you. Take care.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.